Great, thanks, Eric. Really looking forward to this next panel. I think it's actually our first panel of the Energy Week, so we're kicking it off with a bang. So there's a lot happening in Austin right now related to clean energy technologies and startup companies, and we thought it'd be really great to highlight a few of those things and get a few CEOs on the line and ask them about some of their experiences and what's happening in Austin. So this panel is titled "The Emergence of the Energy Innovation Ecosystem in Austin, Texas." While Austin has been a growing tech hub for well more than half a century, recently there's been more recognition of the region as an energy innovation center. What are the ingredients that have made the region even more attractive in fostering its innovation ecosystem? So we have 4 CEOs of startup companies, or I'd say kind of emerging companies at various levels of the startup phase in Austin, and I'll bring them on. I think I'll bring them on screen and then go around and have each of them introduce their technologies and a little bit about their company. So first of all, we've got Cassandra Rinaldo, CEO of SolarProponent, which is a utility scale solar developer. Thank you, Cassandra, for joining us today. Next, we have Teague Egan, CEO of EnergyX. And EnergyX is transforming to become a world leader in renewable energy technologies, including a direct lithium extraction process and a solid-state battery electrolyte formulation. Thanks, Teague, for joining us. Next, we've got Omeed Badkoobeh, CEO of Yotta Energy. And Yotta specializes in solar plus a distributed energy storage technology platform that I'll let Omeed tell you more about. And our 4th CEO is Andy Bowman, CEO of Jupiter Power. And Jupiter Power is currently completing more than 650 megawatt hours of battery projects, including the largest ever built in Texas. So I'm looking forward to hearing Andy's thoughts. So let's start off, just go around the room. You can say a little bit about your company, your technology, and to get us started. So Cassandra, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about SolarProponent?
Sure. So SolarProponent is a utility-scale solar developer backed by NCAP's Energy Transition Fund, and we're headquartered here in Austin. We launched at the end of 2020, so right in the middle of COVID. And despite all that, we were able to recruit top talent, both here from Austin and also recruit people nationwide to move to Austin. And staffing up quickly was critical to our success, of course, and enabled us to exceed our goals in the first year of operations. And I credit our attractive location with a lot of that. We've grown quickly. We now have a almost 6 gigawatt solar portfolio of projects in development, and several of those will be ready for construction later this year. So it's been a whirlwind here. And a little bit about my background: I've spent most of my career in energy, primarily in Houston, vacationing in Austin. So it took me a while to get here. I spent a few years in New York in order to make it to Austin, but I moved here in 2018 and joined the energy transition as CFO of another solar developer. Prior to that, I was VP of commercial support for Repsol Energy North America, where they were establishing the U.S. gas and power trading operations. And previously, I was a chief risk officer for multi-state gas and electric utility in the Northeast, and spent some time doing international M&A and structured finance after graduating from Texas A&M. So now at SolarProponent, I've got the opportunity to work in what I think is the most dynamic area of the energy industry right now, which is solar plus storage. And I'm really excited to be able to do that right from Austin and so close to UT, which has also helped our startup operations.
Great, thanks, Cassandra. Teague, how about telling us a little bit about EnergyX and a bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. really looking forward to the panel today. That was a great introduction, Cassandra. A little bit about EnergyX. We started the company, well, I started the company back in 2018. And we're focused on the problem of the lithium supply-demand gap. So basically, there's much more demand for lithium materials than there are supply. What's driving that demand is the transition to electric vehicles. It takes about 10,000 iPhone batteries to make one electric car vehicle battery. So if you want to make 1 million electric vehicles, that's 10 billion iPhones. There's a huge, huge shortage in lithium. And that's the problem that EnergyX is focused on solving. So how do we produce lithium more efficiently, in larger quantities, more cost effectively, and really looking at the whole lithium supply chain, which is extracting it from the ground in a sustainable way, and then processing it all the way to get to battery grade lithium materials, as well as putting those lithium materials into better batteries that can last longer. So those are a few of the things that we're working on at EnergyX, and really looking forward to the panel and talking about how Austin has played a role in the development of the company.
Great, thanks, Teague. Omeed, how about a little bit about Yotta Energy? Oh, you're muted. Yeah, you're muted, Omeed.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having us. Yeah, so a little bit about Yotta Energy. We started here in Austin, Texas in 2017, actually from a event that was, I think, sponsored by UT. So it's nice to come full circle. So Yotta is solving the frontier of simplifying energy storage. Energy storage today has reached price points that make sense, but what's kind of holding it back is the integration. It's really complex to add energy storage to PV projects. And of course, we're excited to have more and more supply of lithium-based technologies. So what Yotta has pioneered is a completely new format for energy storage. It's decentralized. And by decentralized, I mean we literally place batteries directly behind solar panels. And so rather than having one big battery bank that needs to fit into a shipping container around the building, our battery by default co-locates directly with solar on buildings and industrial sites. And we see a huge growth and demand for energy storage as we start to deploy more EV charging infrastructure. And we have two choices. We can either spend lots of money to upgrade the grid system, or we can quickly deploy dispatchable solar plus storage like Yotta solution. So it's exciting. I think, again, this town has been great to start a startup. And there's so many resources and talent here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Omeed. So Andy, what's happening with Jupiter Power?
Yeah, thanks. So Jupiter is a utility scale standalone storage platform. So we focus on building very large storage projects and connecting them to the grid, kind of front of the meter, in the same way that a power plant or a wind to solar plant would interconnect. And we are building our first projects here in Texas. We have 3 of the 6 that we're starting with online, and we have 3 more that are coming online shortly. And we are developing a number of other large projects around the country. A primary focus on markets in the eastern part of the country, but also California. And I think our focus is really looking very technically at the complex ways that storage needs to operate to really fit into the grid in an optimal way. A lot of the emerging value of storage as time goes by is associated with a greater and greater penetration of non-dispatchables into the generation stack. We're seeing that very dramatically here in Texas in the next couple of years. We've seen it in the past couple decades, but I think we're going to see a huge amount more coming very shortly. And we're seeing that in just about every grid around the country. And so we're very focused on a number of activities that are not in a normal IPP skill set. We have a big analytics group We have a number of PhDs. We do a lot of our own organic applications development and those kinds of things. So that's what Jupiter does. For myself, I graduated from law school at the University of Texas and the OEJ school in 1995, and I've been here ever since. I've started a few companies here. I've had several invitations to move to other parts of the country as those companies have matured one way or another, and I've always turned those down, and I've been very happy about that. I've raised my family here, my kids here, and I think it's a wonderful place to do business. And as we'll talk about, a very interesting fit as the energy world turns, and we're heading deeper into the energy transition.
All right, great. No, it's super interesting. Cassandra, 6 gigawatts of solar, is that going in Texas, or where is
all
that
in
going?
Texas? Yes, our strategy is very large projects. There's economies of scale in that, and so we are focused. And Texas is, everything's bigger in Texas. So
okay, are the projects all in West Texas or a particular
No,
location
none of our
in Texas?
projects are in West Texas. You may know, following the power markets, that there's the congestion issue in West Texas with the overbuild and wind and all of that. So we started off focusing outside of the West Texas, so we're everywhere else.
Okay, all right, interesting. So in the Texas landscape of solar, you have 6 gigawatts of projects. About how many more gigawatts of projects are going in Texas this year? Do you have a sense of that?
It's hard to say. Certainly looking at the queue, you have to discount that pretty heftily. So, and of course, with all the supply chain issues, I think that's going to slow down projects a bit. But people are being pretty cagey about communicating, exactly what they're doing. So I think people are feeling a bit better about 24, 25 than 22, 23.
Okay, great. So storage is definitely part of this whole picture. I mean, Teague, what do you see in terms of the horizon for lithium? We've got, I guess, Cassandra, maybe I can ask you really quickly. You mentioned storage. Is storage part of your projects also?
It is. We are developing all of our solar projects to be co-located with storage, and we've spent. I have a whole new appreciation for why Andy has PhDs, because we've learned in studying this past year how complicated the whole storage business is, and then to layer that on to how to optimize it with solar. We spent a lot of time on that, but we are developing projects so that co-location of storage will be enabled. And the issue is, when is the optimal time to add that storage on, at the very beginning, a little later? There's so many market dynamics to analyze. So that part is, I think, still under analysis.
Okay, great. So T, what about lithium? I mean, all these we're talking massive amounts of batteries, lithium-ion batteries. I mean, and you're addressing this problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good spot to be in. I think so lithium has inherent properties that make it attractive for rechargeable batteries. But what is really driving, at least, the increase in demand for the lithium that I see is electric vehicles. There's really kind of two buckets here of energy storage. There's the electric vehicles and the mobility aspect. And when you're dealing with mobility, weight is a huge factor. You want your batteries to be as light as possible so that they can have higher energy density. I mean, if you're trying to drive around a car that has a 10,000 pound battery, it's probably not going to go very far. So you want your batteries to be as light as possible, and lithium is the lightest metal. and it has great energy density. So we're trying to produce lithium to satiate the demand for electric vehicles. When you move over to the other bucket, stationary storage, I think that, again, we're building, not we as an EnergyX, but the industry is building a lot of its processes around lithium and lithium-based batteries. And, I think you see some of these larger scale utility companies and those focusing on larger scale batteries that are based on lithium. But I think that if you're thinking about stationary storage, there may be other alternatives that pop up that are probably better energy storage solutions in the long term, because lithium, you need lithium for cars, and that you get a higher price point there. So last year the total demand for lithium was about 420,000 tons globally. By 2025, some estimations have projected about 1.5 million tons. And then by 2040, you're looking at like 5.5 million tons a year. So just huge year-over-year growth on the demand for lithium. And that's largely driven by all of the large automotive companies transitioning their fleets to electric.
Okay, great. Omeed, so that this isn't meant to be a debate or anything like that, but certainly different technological approaches towards solar plus storage. So Omeed, I think your company has a really interesting approach to just storage plus solar in general. And maybe can you say a little bit more about what your company is doing and working on?
Yeah. So we focus primarily on what's called behind the meter applications, literally producing and storing power directly where a building consumes it. And there's this analogy that someone shared with me a long time ago and says, do you know what the price per kilowatt hour of the battery in your watch is, right? And chances are that the price per kilowatt hour for the battery in your watch is probably somewhere up in the thousands per kilowatt hour, but you're willing to pay that. The same thing applies for energy storage. There's going to be different value streams for how energy storage can be used and dispatched, right? So by and far, if you're trying to solve utility scale storage, there are some long duration technologies that make more sense than using lithium. But when you're trying to make really quickly dispatchable power at a building site, and you're trying to tie that into the offset of an electric vehicle's charging, today there's no better technology than lithium. And then even within lithium, there's lots of different classifications. When we started Yotta, we started from day one using lithium iron phosphate. And back then, it was not even considered for electric vehicles, right? Today, there's been some improvements. A lot of OEMs for vehicles look like the higher safety rating of this technology. So now you're starting to see automotive companies actually considering using iron phosphate for their transportation as well. So we think this is all great. I think there's companies like EnergyX that will figure out how to extract it more cost effectively. There's going to be more production of lithium-based technology, and overall, it's going to drive down the cost. The thing with the cost of batteries is it actually pencils today if we could monetize all the various revenue streams. A battery that sits at a building site can actually have 14 different revenue streams today. And most projects that are scoped, they're only looking at one or two of those potential revenue streams. It's either being placed in there for demand charge management, which here in Texas, we don't have high demand charges, or it's being done for battery backup, right? But the same placement of that battery behind the meter can actually service all of the grid-facing and grid services models as well. So as we build out this technology, as the models behind these things come to fruition, you're going to see these becoming revenue streams for buildings that have never been thought of before. Because that same battery that's behind the meter can be dispatched, can be aggregated as a virtual power plant and be dispatched when grid prices are high. And just 2 days ago or 3 days ago, when we had the cold spell here in Texas, we were right back up at $5 per kilowatt hour, which is now the new limit in ERCOT. So that's when you would go and have a call to dispatch these batteries, because you can get kilowatt hours produced from them at a far less rate than building that new generation from other sources. So we're all about the placement, and that's what's most important. And that placement is going to be driven drastically by electric vehicles, because every electric vehicle charger is essentially a dryer. So imagine a building with 300 parking spots, and then at some point, or an apartment complex, at some point, everyone that lives there is going to want the ability to charge their vehicle, just like a homeowner would. And so how do you add 300 car chargers to a building that never intended to have that much of a power draw? And that's where we come in.
Okay, cool. Andy, maybe you can explain for me and the audience, what's the difference between front of the meter and back of the meter storage? So Omeed's talking about doing behind the meter, and you're talking about your company doing front of the meter. What are some of the pros and cons of that, or is both things needed?
Yeah. Front of the meter, like I was saying earlier, is similar to any power plant. You can imagine it's someone that is selling power at the wholesale market and connecting with a meter. So whatever you're selling into the grid goes through and gets metered by ERCOT and is subject to that whole kind of wholesale power system that we have. Whether it's Texas or any other state. Behind the meter means applying batteries in ways that where you might have a load customer, for instance, someone who's consuming power that has that meter, and then you're supplying services. Depending on the business model, you're providing storage services to that customer that has that grid interconnection. So you're behind their meter in that case, not front of the meter as a direct market participant yourself. So, just speaking very broadly, and Omeed, you know a lot more about front of the meter, so correct me if I'm getting something wrong there. But that's the basics of it. And so storage at the level that we're doing it at Jupiter, we're discharging power in the exact same way that anybody would that sells power in the wholesale market. The difference, of course, with storage is that occasionally you're charging. And ERCOT and other grids have swiftly adapted rules and FERC to accommodate that crucial distinction, and that's been a work in progress. But it's gone pretty smoothly, particularly the last several years, to making a really coherent, pretty well organized set of rules that accommodate storage at the utility scale, operating front of the meter in a way that's broadly similar to the way that other generators can.
Okay, great. We've got a question from the audience. So there's a lot. Basically, the question is, what about hydrogen for storage? I mean, there's lots and lots of talk about hydrogen. I don't know if any of you have thoughts on hydrogen.
I'll start. I think hydrogen is a great technology. It's always been the cost about building the infrastructure, right? It's very easy to build out infrastructure for EV charging because most of the EV infrastructure is already deployed. I see hydrogen in some cases, but I don't see it powering light duty vehicles the way that some people envision. I think we've already made that leap to go straight towards electric vehicles and battery-based vehicles.
Cassandra, have you thought about it in your business where you have 6 gigawatts of solar and kind of seasonal type storage? Is that you're thinking more like, look, these are the batteries we've got, and as you mentioned, how do you take the technology that exists now and deploy? Are you focused more on that as opposed to maybe the next step of hydrogen?
Yes, this past year with the startup of all the solar and trying to figure out the solar plus storage optimization, we haven't spent any time on hydrogen. I think NCAP's Energy Transition Fund is, I'm sure, looking into that and exploring that. And Andy and I are, Jupiter Power is a sister company. We may have a new sister company, at some point in the future in hydrogen. So.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, have you all thought about that at all as a competitive technology? Or again, it's as a startup, you have to focus on something, and you can't start doing 1,000 different things. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been technology agnostic. If they're superior, we happen to be building and, mainly are focused on lithium ion energy storage technologies. But there are a number of other promising, really interesting ideas out there, of which hydrogen is one. Hydrogen has some really unique advantages because it's a molecule and, is a fuel source and can be shipped and transported in different ways than electricity can, for instance. And I think there are some unique real benefits to that as you think deeply in the energy transition. We really need these kinds of fuels. But I can tell you that, it remains a pretty expensive product to create out of electricity in particular. There's a lot of complexity around the diversion of electricity into something like this. And I think also, with solar, we saw at the beginning of the, kind of the 2000s, we saw a lot of different interesting solar technologies, many of which could have one day ruled the roost. Out of that came photovoltaic technologies. There are a few different of those too, but I mean, generally that has won the investment and gotten the economies of scale and really pushed the price down. There's a lot of similarities today with lithium ion. It may not be the best and the ultimate and the all-time most efficient scientific solution to energy storage at the moment, but it seems to have a huge amount of momentum behind it, and the market seems to be, very much embracing it and moving that way. And, that may complicate things for hydrogen and a bunch of these other technologies as time goes by.
Okay. I want to shift the focus a little bit to the actual running of your companies, for example, and what some of the challenges are as a startup in the energy space. I guess I'll start with you, Teague. What are some of your biggest challenges as an entrepreneur and founder of a startup company, and maybe what are some of the benefits of being in Austin?
So I think, I can start with some of the benefits of being in Austin. We chose Austin for a few reasons. One, I think that there's a really deep talent pool in Austin. All signs are pointing towards Austin becoming kind of the next mini Silicon Valley. You have all the big tech companies that are building headquarters or some sort of presence in Austin, from Google's new building and Facebook. Apple has a few campuses in Austin. Obviously, Dell started there a few decades ago. Oracle is bringing a bunch of people. Not to mention Tesla just relocated their global headquarters there. So when you think about engineering talent, there's plenty of engineering talent in Austin. So we look to hire engineers and scientists, and it's been a great place to be for that. With that talent and those companies comes venture capital. You start to see a lot of money flowing into Austin, and then Austin is also unique because it's obviously in Texas, and Texas is known for being kind of a big energy state. Obviously, Houston is kind of the global headquarters of oil and gas. And, I think that Houston is trying to take that title of the renewable energy city, but, I think Austin is probably ahead of them on that. So Austin's been great for that reason. As far as some of the challenges with starting a startup, there's a million, there's a laundry list of challenges. Every day there's ups and downs. You lose important people in your company, or you sign a big contract. You'll be running low on money, and then you'll find investors, or you'll start generating revenue. I think that where we stand today, we're trying to execute every day on reaching commercialization. And our company started based off some licensed technology out of the University of Texas. The engineering, specifically the chemical engineering school, We licensed some membrane separation technology that was extremely good at separating lithium from other impurities out of salt brine. And taking a rather nascent technology from an academic setting and scaling that up to something that's viable in industry and robust enough for commercialization, all the steps involved, I'd say is overall been the most challenging thing. Scientific innovation is slow and incremental. And while people, from a distance may look at it as a huge breakthrough, that's never the case. So dealing with, the rigors of innovation mixed with kind of the management of a startup, like I would say a lot of my job is, managing people and delegating tasks and making sure that the ship continues to move forward. So that's kind of, I don't know if that specifically answered your question, but that's some of the things that I think about on a day-to-day basis in EnergyX.
Yeah, well, I think out of the four companies represented here, you're probably the earliest in terms of innovation, like taking as you're saying, a nascent technology, trying to commercialize it. Omeed, where's your technology at in terms of TRL level or however you look at it? Is it pretty much like developed manufacturable, or did you start also with a fairly early innovation?
Yeah, we started with a fairly early innovation that's been in development now for 4.5 years, but we are literally going through what we call the production ramp up right now. So our product is being produced at mass scale. We got hit with a bit of the component shortages, so we have some delays there, but we've now secured the components to build basically our first production ramp up. And there's two components to our technology. We build our solar leaf, which is the battery storage. We also have a power conversion system that's now in market. And we're finalizing our software piece of the whole system. So we're in market. In fact, we're targeting 12 million in revenue this year. So we're going through that painful transition. And like Teague shared, there's a lot of just people management. I'm very excited about Austin, but you asked about the challenges. The challenge is it's getting expensive. And it was once a time where Austin made a lot of sense because it was this mix of talent and innovation and investors and affordability. And let's be honest, that affordability piece is kind of diminishing really quickly. It's getting very expensive to relocate new hire and new talents to Austin. And so I wonder, I think one of the biggest advantages to Austin is basically being a hub, a hub city between Houston and San Antonio and Dallas. And being able to basically pull from all three of those cities. But we should be thinking about how do we keep Austin somewhat affordable. We still have a lot of space to grow. There's a lot of space on the east side. So I think we can solve those issues. But it's a very exciting place to be. I think it is a very special place. It's got the best of both worlds, in my opinion, of culture, of mix, and I think it's a very balanced city.
Yeah. So in terms of manufacturing in Austin, do you see, the future of Yotta Energy ramping up manufacturing in Austin, or do you ever think about having to move that somewhere else?
We actually so right now we're not manufacturing end product here in Austin, but it's something that we're certainly looking into. We're going to be applying to some of the DOE loan opportunities specifically for that purpose. So again, I think it's a great place to set up manufacturing. I think it's a great time to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And we have lots of space to expand here in Austin. So, you have a lot of towns like Kyle and Buda, and you go out east and there's plenty of space between here and Bastrop. So there's no limit on space. And I think that's what makes Austin very exciting.
Okay, cool. Andy, where's your battery storage technology? Is it easy to get? Is it off the shelf? Like you can get everything that you want to let your business thrive, or are there any technology showstoppers?
Most of the equipment that we're buying is equipment that's There are a number of major vendors in the, call it the stationary energy storage space, front of the meter, utility scale. Tesla here in town is one of the vendors of that kind of equipment. But the cells themselves, whether it's for Tesla or any of the other major vendors, and most of them are Asian companies, whether it's LG Chem or Samsung or Sungrow. There are a number of large companies that sell the systems that we use. But the underlying cells are the same, whether they go in our stationary storage equipment or inside a car. And most of them almost all of them are manufactured in China at the moment, from the sources that we have at least. And so, what we've seen are pretty normal in terms of 2020 and 2021. That is to say, pretty normal supply chain disruptions, owing to COVID and all the other drama around the world, which seems to be intensifying lately. I think our equipment has a reasonably mature market for vendors, for OEMs selling the kind of equipment that we install and operate. It's quickly changing. The particular design of equipment that we're installing now is very different from the design of equipment we'd be installing next year, for instance. They're moving from air cooled to liquid cooled, which is a pretty dramatic shift, but a great improvement, much more efficient. But I think for our business, for Jupiter, what is the bigger challenge is, what do you do with that battery once you've installed it? And this just goes to, normally if you build a power plant, you get to COD, start operations, you turn it on, and you kind of drive off, and you're either producing power or not, and you're letting it kind of live out in the market with the contracts you've put on it. But with storage, it's a much more complicated story, because as Omeed was saying, there's all kinds of different revenue opportunities with storage, whether it's front of the meter, behind the meter, and the complexity around making those decisions, and the complexity around being able to charge and discharge, and being able to decide whether it's more valuable to charge or discharge at this point in time, or to wait until there's a more valuable revenue opportunity down the road. There's just a huge amount of decisions to be made in optimizing the asset once it's online. And there's a lot of optimization, basically decision making, that's associated with massive data sets, that all the things that influence the price of power and the price of the other revenue opportunities you've got. So that is a more complicated part of the business from our point of view. And it goes to some of Austin's strengths. A lot of the skill sets that we're really focused on are well represented at UT and Austin. And we've also drawn quite a few people from Houston and from the energy world down there to join us and bring their many talents in these complicated areas from other parts of the energy world into the storage space.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So Cassandra, I want to hear all about your challenges. I mean, as a utility scale solar developer in Austin, I guess, yeah, what are your challenges, and why in Austin? I mean, I'm just really curious about your story there.
It's interesting to listen to the co-panelists here and their challenges with this really complicated, new, cutting edge technology. I would say what we've spent most of the last year trying to evaluate is the cutting edge legislation that is continually, significantly impacting investment decisions for solar, and what that does to sourcing modules. There's the whole geopolitics of of the tariffs and duties and anti-dumping claims, and we don't have a lot of solar manufacturing in the U.S. There's only a couple of companies that do that. So to meet the energy transition goals, we have a challenge there, and sometimes the legislation is not necessarily supportive of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to really understand what's coming down the pipe, and so that we can position the company and our investment decisions accordingly, is, I think, one of the main areas that we've been focused on this past year.
Yeah, I mean, how have the solar tariffs affected your company? When you formed SolarProponent, were the tariffs in place, or did
They
those
were,
come
but
online?
yeah, but we were thinking, everybody was assuming that they would come off, and then we just had a really extended period of uncertainty related to that, and then finally they just bifacials are exempted, so that's good for us. And then we thought we had kind of made it through the anti-dumping, countervailing duties process, and now that's been opened back up. So there's always those kind of things, and then of course the whole uncertainty of just the whole build back better, and how that might impact our business, because there's a lot of tax incentives that may or may not come about, which would change the financing structure and the people that are interested in solar. So, and of course that's not resolved yet. So it's been a pretty, we call it the solar coaster, because of all of the continual changes that we have to evaluate, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, and so maybe you said this. Why in Austin for your company, to be close to the capital, or it's just not related to that?
Well, it makes perfect sense. I think we might have talked about this before. ERCOT is here, so that's very convenient when we have issues. But also just the talent pool. I mean, I partnered with our chief development officer to launch the company back in 2020. He was in Austin. He is an UT MBA grad. When we were recruiting, that gave us a pipeline into the UT professor network for MBA grad students, and so we were able to get a kickstart on our recruiting through that. Also, just as you're growing, sometimes you don't need a whole head count at once. You need a part-time person, contractors that are grad students and highly qualified, but not quite ready for a full-time gig. It's just kind of helped us flexibly get high-powered talent, being close to UT. And of course, in Austin, there is a strong renewables existence already, and we were able to recruit, our director of interconnection, who's a UT alum, was already in Austin. So it's like Teague said, there's a good talent pool here, and that helped us. And then that also helped us recruit people nationwide who want to come to Austin. So
that's great. Well, I think my final question for me anyway, before maybe we'll have some time for a couple more audience questions, is what do you all think we should be doing at UT? Maybe you talk about the talent pool and that sort of thing. Do you have any specific recommendations for UT? How what should we do as an academic institution to help support innovation more effectively? I'll just let whoever wants to jump in first, and
I'll jump in with some ideas.
Yeah.
So one, I think there should be some specific degree programs that run specific to solar or energy storage design and engineering. That there's electrical engineering, but then there's nothing really specific and catered towards the talent pool that we're looking for, and I think Jupiter and SolarProponent are also looking for. The next thing, I think it'd be great if there was some sort of a lab that was built by UT that startups can participate in demo technology. I think there's certainly enough startups here, and that would be something that, something that essentially could bring in the startup ecosystem community with the university students. And a physical space, a physical lab would be a great place to have something like that. So,
yeah. Teague, do you want to jump in on that? You and I have talked about that a little bit. Opportunities for UT, maybe.
Yeah, I think that UT obviously already has a great energy institute. We license technology from UT. They're focused on, they have a great battery program with Dr. John Goodenough, great chemical engineering and materials for water and energy technology center with Dr. Benny Freeman. And then, a bunch of other great professors that have groups at UT of graduate students and PhD candidates. I think, what would make sense is I've struggled a little bit trying to find potentially interns for, summer internship programs and things like that. I know that there's a careers fair, but I think that UT tried to charge startups to come do. I've just had a little trouble finding good interns and getting exposure to some of the students through opportunities for interaction with our company. So I think that what Omeed just said could be kind of a good route, a lab where startups could come demo their technology, or some sort of open careers fair where companies big and small can come and meet some of the engineering students that are both undergraduate and graduate, but just more of like an open sharing format to bring the exciting startups and even kind of like mid-scale companies that are popping up in Austin into the UT ecosystem. And maybe obviously, we've only been here for a couple of years and COVID has prevented some of that. Like maybe that existed before the pandemic, but I just haven't witnessed it yet.
Yeah, no, I think we could use some better organization that way. I mean, certainly, I think the Energy Institute, we could play a role even in helping organize some sort of event like that. I think the students would like it, and also we could serve as a portal. I think this like matchmaking. I mean, we've got all these students who are also looking for opportunities for those summer internships, and so we should follow up about that. Andy, Cassandra, what are your thoughts? What are some things? I mean, Andy, UT really well, intimately well, and I guess Cassandra, what are some of your thoughts about what UT maybe should be doing or could be doing right now that it's not doing?
We've been pretty happy with, I guess, what we're leveraging an informal network, but I think a more formal one. We thought about an intern, and I think we didn't quite know where to get started on that formally, so we just didn't do it. So I think Teague's idea there might have been helpful in hindsight. Like we probably would have gotten an intern had there been a simple process to go through to do that. But we've been fortunate in having a strong UT network of employees that have enabled us to leverage UT's resources and employees.
Great. Andy, what about you?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that's just been said. I think it could be easier for companies like ours to interface and obtain interns and get involved in hiring. There's a lot of bureaucracy to go through from where I stand. That said, we have managed that, and we have hired such wonderful people out of various UT programs, and we're so happy to have them. And it's such been a huge part of our growth. But my 10 cents worth would be, from the university's point of view, oil and gas revenues, I don't know what percentage of the UT endowment, UT system endowment comes from oil and gas, but my guess is it's a very large component. And it's natural, I think, that the university, if it was built to some degree from that incredible bounty, that it is reflected that as well. So many graduates and areas of study and work streams among professors have been focused, usefully focused on oil and gas and thermal technologies and all that stuff. And there is such an opportunity, as everybody on this panel is talking about, there is such an opportunity that is very quickly headed in a very different direction. And my hope is, as wonderful as the graduates and the interns that we've had are, I would really love to see more of a focus academically on entrepreneurialism. I'd like to see more in the energy transition, the clean energy, clean businesses. I think UT could be doing more to really stretch in this direction of the energy transition from a course availability and degree programs and support for students that are interested in that. Certainly the students that I've interfaced with, there's a very strong degree of interest in these subjects.
Yeah, those are great ideas. We have a couple more minutes, and any last thoughts from any of you all that you think you want to throw out there to the audience before we say goodbye?
Well, I'd offer one thing. I think we've all said a lot of positive things about Austin, and I could go on with any number of positive things about it. And I love working here and living here and doing business here. But just to even the scale a little bit, it has dawned on me reflecting that I've started a few businesses, and I don't think I've ever succeeded in raising money here in Austin. I've tried, but with the businesses that I've had, I've always had to look elsewhere, whether it's Houston or Dallas or New York, California, and abroad. And so, maybe it's just me, but I also haven't encountered an investment network that is as focused on kind of green technologies as I found in other places. So for what that's worth, just to try to even the ledger a little bit.
Yeah, in Austin itself, I guess. Omeed, Teague, Cassandra, how about you all? I mean, is there venture capital investors in Austin itself, or do you usually find your investment outside of Austin?
Houston, New York.
Outside of Austin, yeah.
I've had some luck here in Austin. I mean, I think there's a good ecosystem. But yeah, the first few investors were actually from San Antonio. But I met one of our biggest investors at South by Southwest. So I think it's possible. But it's certainly catching up now. I think there's more and more VC firms that are relocating here to Austin.
Yeah. Teague, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I just moved to Austin last June, and that was, we had an empty space and a couple people. We really got we really settled in August. So I haven't been there in too long, but I found some pretty good individual investors, met with a few funds in Austin. We have a unique company because most of our customer base is in South America. So that's where our biggest investor is, located in South America. But I think that, the investors are certainly out there in Austin. VCs are coming in, and there's a lot of wealth in Austin. So just gotta try harder.
Well, I mean, there's, I think having the world's global now, anyway, to some extent, and you're going to be raising money from people who are based in multiple locations. But I think your point, Andy, I mean, if you have, people with offices and money in Austin kind of roaming the halls of UT or the, whatever the streets of Congress, or, looking for inventions and innovators and entrepreneurs to invest in, that is a little bit of a different kind of community than maybe we have here, where we've got a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of technology, but we have to look outside of Austin for the actual investment to come from, if that's the case. So I really appreciate you all for taking the time for the panel. Cassandra, Teague, Omeed, Andy, your companies are all pretty amazing. I'm impressed by what you're all doing, and love seeing more success in the future. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for letting us participate.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian.
Great. See you later.
Yeah.